Hey everybody, welcome back. This is John Malanca with the United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. I have a old dear friend, Dr. Chintu Sharma out of Maryland, talking about, well, actually, I was originally going to have you on, Doc, talking about PTSD and cannabis. But he's also a medical director for a hospital in the Maryland area, specializing right now in COVID. And so I thought that would be, because it's a hot topic for everyone. We're in the middle of this pandemic. It'd be a topic to discuss, which can lead into PTSD as well. And we can get you on for another show. But great seeing you again, Dr. Sharma. Thanks for being on, and love the kite behind you as well.
Thanks, John. The kite's a long story. We'll save that for another episode.
Podcast.
So, just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Chintu Sharma. I'm a medical doctor out here in the state of Maryland. I've been practicing here for about 15 years. I work for a group called Adfinitas Health. I'm the medical director at one of their facilities in Annapolis, known as Anne Arundel Medical Center. So if I see you around, I see you around. A little bit of background. I grew up in Southern California in a small town. Well, there's no such thing as a small town in Los Angeles, but that's what we call it, small town of Cerritos. From there, I went to the University of California, Berkeley. So if you got any bears out there, I salute you. Thank you for
the University of California.
Yep, the University of California. From there, I went back to Southern California again. I was a teacher in East LA in the largest high school in Los Angeles at the time. It was the one in Boyle Heights. I'm blanking on the name. Don't know why I'm forgetting, but the largest high school in East Los Angeles in Boyle Heights. I spent a year as a science teacher there. And then from there, I went to the University of Iowa for medical school and came out to East Los Angeles again to work at LA County USC as a resident in internal medicine and pediatrics. From there, my wife said, we're moving back east. So I'm wearing her colors. So the University of Maryland. University of Maryland folks are pretty strong. So, I ended up out here on the East Coast for that reason. So I've been working out here in the East Coast from, you could say, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan all the way down to Virginia Beach area for the past 15 years as a hospital doctor. Now, I have hobbies and stuff that led to the development of a small marijuana practice, not growing marijuana, but prescribing it for folks who would like to.
Recommending.
Prescribing is the wrong word. The right word is consulting and recommending medical cannabis for folks who need it. And that came out of, a lot of interest and stuff on the side. So I'm here to talk about COVID, and I'll start with one little tidbit. None of us wanted to specialize or learn or deal with this. This is nature, and it came out of the blue. And the way it came on our shores and the way it traveled across our country and everything we're witnessing is going to be part of history. Because of how wild and crazy and unusual this situation is, and the politics of what we have in the background, we're in a very special time. And if you are feeling anxious, if you are feeling stressed, if this is hitting every nerve in your body the wrong way, it's just the way all of these things have collapsed together into a dumpster fire. That's the only way I can call it, John.
Yeah.
This is a large dumpster fire. We are all part of it. And I'm going to be very honest. Our life right now and our life before COVID and our life after COVID may not be the same. The impact of what we're seeing is accumulation of so many different factors. You could tie into this overpopulation. You could tie into this meat consumption and the industry that brings meat to our table. You could tie into this environmental causes all the way through global climate change. And you could tie into this all of these factors creating a situation where organisms and infections which shouldn't jump to humans, which should remain in their species, get pushed to just right into our system and into the population. The frequency of that is increasing with time and not decreasing. So there has to be a reason for that. And I hear a lot of good conspiracies. I hear a lot of good stuff about this. But the honest answer is all of these factors and everything in motion, I don't know how anyone could conspire to create a machine to push this to us this fast and this many times, because this isn't the first. Swine flu, bird flu, Zika, and here we are sitting now in a world of COVID. But before I rant to rave for forever, John, I'll go ahead and let you break into some questions that you thought were right up there. And give you some of my
like you
thoughts.
said, it is a dumpster fire. I mean, everything, and it's not only just affecting us here in the States; it's affecting us globally, and that's pretty scary. When we saw this coming on, I was over in Asia in January, and people started talking about it, and I made it back, and I went, and then I talked to people over there, and one by one, you started hearing these stories. Then I've talked to people, colleagues over here, that were having the same symptoms back in December and January. It really didn't hit us here in the States publicly, I say, until March. When did it appear? When do you think it appeared here in America on our shores?
You're asking a very complicated question, and we have clues. Now, we don't have the exact date and time, but here are some clues. So there was a study done in France that said that their first patient case, their patient zero, was December 25th or 27th, somewhere in that ballpark. If the first case that hit France was somewhere in mid-December or late December, then, how far are we from China? So the number one question is, and this is, what are the portals of entry? I mean, we're separated from China with two large oceans, the Canadian border and the Mexican border. We're isolated. We're isolated from so much. How does stuff make it to us? And it comes down to a couple key things. So let's look at the flu season. Our flu season starts on the West Coast, spreads across the country, ends on the East Coast. And it goes in a cyclic pattern every year. So we know that whatever it is starts on that side and translates over. So that's our normal pattern. That pattern usually starts, they say, up towards the University of Washington. And for that reason, one of our top virologists, the guy who studies all this, the guy who tries to figure this out and track the new stuff when it comes, sits right there at the University of Washington. So we're sitting in a situation where we have a normal pattern. Now, COVID came onto us, I feel, in a pattern which does not follow that. So I know that in the beginning, a lot of folks thought it touched the West Coast way early and it was there, right from the beginning. But the honest answer is, when we start looking at the way the cases came to our country, and I'm talking about the COVID that's the killer COVID. There are 4 normal variants of coronavirus that come to our shores. They're in the seasonal flu chain. And we see those every year. And, the major consequence of that may be some bronchitis and wheezing and stuff of that nature. The secondary consequence we sometimes see in those cases are heart-related diseases. And that's a normal pattern that we see. This killer COVID that we saw, and the killer COVID is the one we saw in New York, devastate that entire city. The onset of that and the folks that traveled there came primarily from Europe. So the pattern of transmission across this country of that bad COVID, if it hit France, late December, there was plenty of travel between France and the United States, especially New York. And to go from a time spot where we're like, okay, maybe this was starting to brew in Europe, late December, meaning it maybe even started earlier than China's telling us. So China's timeline doesn't match this at all, because they started reporting this in January. So if December is the time it started flowing across our country, and it started from the East Coast instead of the West Coast, and a couple of those folks traveled to Seattle, we have a pattern that goes reverse our normal flu pattern. And right now, if you look at the way it played out, it was New York and New England, all the way through Michigan. We were on the Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Ohio. There's another band that goes right below it. So we were in that wave as it traveled down. And as it went further south, hitting Georgia, Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and now hitting the coast of California. So the pattern of movement does not match our normal flu pattern. The transmission looks like it started on this coast, and it looks like it primarily started in New England. So my best guess, if I were to give you a guess, would be that it came on shore here, and it's been brewing here a lot longer than we know. And possibly early January was when it started to rear its head and to cause trouble. Now, how do we know that? And the reason why I think it's important to kind of realize this, we are not going to have perfect testing in the beginning. We're not going to have a perfect way to detect this. And the only way we can clearly see what's going on is the fact that the death rate for the entire world has risen.
Yeah.
So all-cause mortality has gone up. If everything was exactly the same, we have a periodic kind of curve that just follows each year. And that curve has been disrupted, and it has been accelerated and lifted, not only in this country, but globally. So, you know, the number one thing I see, and even today online, I made a comment somewhere and I got all this flack from folks who don't want to believe this still. If this were a conspiracy against our president, then why would we be killing the entire globe? You know, some of the stuff I kind of normally have to reason through, it's abnormal, and it's this dumpster fire we're sitting in. So all-cause mortality from the beginning of this year till now has been up. We didn't have a reason for it in the beginning, and there were all sorts of mysterious things that were happening, where people would develop ARDS or end up in the ICU. And the good news is the early cases, a lot of survival was there because those cases were young. And the old cases, the folks who are elderly, it seemed to fall within reason of their normal cardiovascular disease to pass away. So, you can hide certain things for a period of time before it becomes obvious. But, sitting with some of my, the benefit of being in a hospital is you get to talk to a lot of other docs. You get to kind of sit and actively think through problems. You get to actively engage an issue and kind of look all across disciplines for, are you seeing this too, or am I just hallucinating? Wait, are you seeing this also, or is this just me in this one case? And when you start to see that there's this odd trend of death kind of happening from, starting early January in some parts of the country, and then in February, we have a couple cases that we retrospectively went back and said, oh, what would you call that now? And we're looking at x-rays and CAT scans, and we're like, well, I'd call that COVID. And in March, where we're like, wow, how many of these do we have? And we're cycling through this. March here was awful. April here was even worse. And by the time, May came, we finally saw things calm down. So this was a cycle we went through, and it was unlike anything we've seen before.
So do you think a lot of these, the death counts, do you think those are accurate? Because, you had
I think they're underreported.
Underreported.
And this is the reason why. There are a lot of deaths that happen that we don't know. So let's put it this way. Is our testing really decent, and do we have enough of it? And are we getting that testing back before the person dies? And the answer to that, in these scenarios, especially when this wave crashes in a state, the answer is all of that lacks. We lack all of that capacity. The minute 1 million people have a problem, we do not have the lab capacity to handle that. We do not have the capacity to have enough gowns for all the doctors and nurses to churn through it the normal way we do. We don't have the capacity to provide a mask a day for every person who's on the ground at the front line, just taking care of people who can spew respiratory stuff in your face. We don't have the capacity for this. So my honest answer is, if we were to go back and retrospectively look, we're probably underreporting on a large margin, and not only here, globally. Do you think a poor country would have the means to test everyone that died or before they died? If we can't do it, they're just mass burying people in a lot of these places.
Yeah.
The mass burials, the satellite photos and the imagery you get from everywhere else is awful.
So you talking about testing, in off camera, you mentioned that you think you've been. I mean, I think every doctor is putting their life at risk, and every what do you call the workers? Sorry, blank here.
All our frontline workers,
All the frontline workers, from
all
the
our
police
janitorial
to the
staff, our
firemen, the
police,
paramedics.
paramedics.
The
So let's
doctors
look
and
at the
nurses.
numbers. Let's look at the numbers. The
And
number of
so,
firefighters in DC and Maryland that were affected when we hit this major peak.
how many? How many? Sorry.
We were well above 50% of the first line workers that were out there, firefighters, police officers. These guys were the first to be infected, to be honest. And, thank God they're in decent health and made it all out and seem to be doing okay. But a large portion of the police force, especially around DC, fire department, your ambulance crews, your EMT crews, a lot of them were infected because who knew what was happening in March? We barely had enough supplies to supply us. Yeah. And New York had the greatest need. So we were shipping what we could out to New York. Most of the states were doing that. So we're sitting in a situation where a lot of frontline workers were exposed. Do I think I was exposed? And the answer honestly is I probably was. And I wouldn't be surprised if, years later we find out what the consequences of that were. Somehow a lot of us made it through. The symptoms are vague. So the actual published stuff from China only gives us so much information. And when we're looking at our data here, we had so many more variants of things that we know that the information we got was mostly incomplete and had to have been in order to explain what we're seeing. So we have a large portion of folks who are going to be affected. The symptoms vary. For some people, it's severe, it's fever. And the most common thing is fatigue. And the next most common thing, which was nowhere reported, was loss of taste and smell. Yeah, So fatigue and inability to smell, that could be all sorts of stuff. But those two things and fever, and then it could be there were 2 or 3 dominant ways it showed up. There were the folks who had a lot of diarrhea, just all sorts of diarrhea. And you're thinking this is a respiratory problem. Why are they having massive diarrhea? But there was a subset of population that just had abdominal issues and diarrhea, and then a little bit of respiratory, and they went home. And there was another group of folks that their primary issue was cough and shortness of breath. And, a lot of those guys really got pretty sick. Both groups could have, folks who don't do well, but this group seemed to do a little better than this group when I look back and I think about it. And there's a third group, and the third group is all sorts of other things that we didn't expect. I've seen folks who came in with what we thought was a stroke, and it turned out to be COVID. I've seen folks who we thought had just a blood clot and turned out to be COVID.
How are you finding these tests? Is it blood test, urine test,
the nasal swab?
No, nasal swab. And so, can you explain the difference between a positive COVID test and then a positive antibody test?
It's a good question. So it goes kind of like this. When we're doing the swab, we're doing an mRNA, we're doing an RNA assay. So we're taking a swab, we're trying to get some active secretions, and we're trying to get a sample of that. And then with a reagent and a special plate that has almost like an antibody to that RNA, if you have it on your swab or in any way, shape, and form, you dab it on there, there's a chemical reaction that lights it up on the plate. And so a lot of our tests are like that, where we take a sample and we're trying to detect if that sample is positive or negative. If it lights up, it's positive. If it doesn't light up, it's negative. And it can be that simple. A lot of the home kits look like those pregnancy tests.
Pregnancy, exactly. How accurate are those? Because I'm hearing a lot of things. It gives a lot of false positives too.
Well, let's just look at a little bit of data and history here. So, what we're seeing is historic. The FDA in the beginning was trying to catch up on detecting what the optimal tests are. Out on the market, there are hundreds of tests from all over Asia and Europe that were proposed as ways and methods to test for this. We didn't know what the accuracy of these tests were in the beginning, but from what we saw in practice, if someone had a negative test and all the symptoms, we still were highly suspicious it was COVID. It most likely was COVID. And if we didn't prove it on the first sample, definitely when we went back and looked back at things and retested, it was positive. So our testing in the beginning was not the best, and our testing now, which is in a better shape and condition, in that the FDA has tested and approved certain companies to deliver tests to our shores. The stuff we have now is better, but there is the ability to have false negatives, and are there false positives? We're going to find out about that with time. Okay. But the false negative rate is there, and the reason why is, in order to get the sample, you have to take a swab, shove it in a person's nose, and take a very deep sample. If you move, you fidget, or they're unable to get quite back there and scratch the brain, the sample's inadequate. And if the sample's inadequate, well, the test is not going to be accurate either. So part of it is sampling. Part of it is the testing isn't perfect. We don't know how perfect or imperfect it is. We'll know in the next couple months. And that's just that mRNA assay. Then you asked about antibodies testing.
Yeah.
Antibody testing at this stage in the game, my personal opinion is it's faulty. I think we're only going to be able to detect some of this, and this is the reason why. Antibody testing is looking at an antibody directed at part of this protein in this genome that's out there, right? So you're only going to be able to detect a small portion of that. And so which portion is the correct portion to detect whether someone had coronavirus and this deadly coronavirus we're talking about? And the answer is, we know a little bit about it, but I don't think we've fleshed it out enough for us to have a test that's highly accurate and is going to be positive in 80-90% of the patients who've been exposed to this. So I think our test may detect if you have the antibody, but is that the right antibody that detects all the patients who've been exposed to coronavirus? And the answer is, we don't know. So at this point in time, the testing is semi-faulty. So we're going to detect some of the people who've been exposed to coronavirus. The same test will probably miss a portion. What portion? We don't know yet, because there might be other antibodies that we generate that are equally effective at staving off disease. Which is the right antibody is the question. And I don't know if this has been fleshed out enough for us to say that with any accuracy. So our antibody testing in all shapes and form, if we detect you have it, the good news is your blood and your serum contains an antibody that we know did fight it off in a healthy person and can then save another life. So if someone is antibody positive and had signs of the disease, they can then contribute their plasma to treat someone else. And that's one of the life-saving treatments that is available, that's being studied.
Does one get immunity if they do have the positive antibodies?
Another very good question. And there's studies that go...
And does it ever end? I mean,
half of the studies go this way, and there are a couple that go this way. Now, what do I mean by that? The studies that go this way are the studies that say, oh, you develop an antibody to it, and it lasts for X amount of time. So there's studies that say 2 to 3 months. There's studies that say longer. There's studies that say shorter. So there's studies that suggest that people develop these protective antibodies, but they don't last. They last for a finite period of time. Then there's studies on the other side that are saying, hey, those studies might be faulty because they're not checking the right antibody. So there's a subset that are saying that. Then there's going to be a subset that says there are no antibodies that are protective. We have 3 different thoughts right now. There isn't a consensus on which is the right one. Now, we do have background knowledge because we have 4 strains of coronavirus that normally circulate through the population. And from what we can see in the journals of virology and what our ID docs talk about, it goes kind of like this. When we see young kids get the flu, yes, they can get coronavirus over and over and over again. But for whatever reason, their parents over time can cope with it better with age. So there may be something protective about all those exposures, and there may be some sort of antibody to it, but we really don't know what that antibody is or looks like. So let's say, all the vaccine development that's happening now, they're targeting part of the coronavirus protein. It's the most prominent part. It's the reason why we call it coronavirus. The thing that makes the crown on electron microscopy is a spike protein. And if that's the right one to target, then we cure it. If that's the wrong one to target, we make disease worse. We may actually give you disease. So is that the right thing to target, or is there something else we can hit that may be more unique to coronavirus? Because the problem is that spike protein has a receptor on it that binds to a receptor site that's found from our entire body. And the reason why there's so many different symptoms and constellations of this is that spike protein can hit all sorts of different cellular targets. So if the target is from head to toe, and we put an antibody to kill that target, and that target's already in us, could we accidentally make an antibody that kills us or hurts us? So this whole vaccine stuff is scary too, because do we have the right stuff or the wrong stuff? Could we be doing this right? Could we be doing this completely wrong?
So what do you say, like a buddy of mine, he and his wife went down and got tested, and it turns out he tested positive and his wife didn't.
Okay.
What do you say for that? I mean, like when you come home from work, is your wife scared, and how often do you test yourself? Because you're dad as well. Your mom lives with you, or mother-in-law lives with you. I mean, is this something that they put you down and hose you off before you walk in the house? I mean, kind of joke about it, but
we joke about it now.
Yeah.
But the protocol to enter the house has been the same since this whole thing started.
Take your shoes off, take your clothes off, and jump in the shower.
Run for the shower. Put everything in the wash and run for the shower. And it's been the same the entire time. And everything that comes in, like a cell phone or all this other stuff, everything has to be cleansed with alcohol. So there's a protocol to this. And it really does kind of stink, because you think about it, some of my colleagues, a lot of the nurses I work with, a lot of the techs, a lot of the janitorial staff, I mean, they have young kids. My kids are at least old enough for me to go, hey, back up, put the dogs behind you, just give me some space so I can run to the shower. But if you have a young, like a little toddler, a baby, I mean, some of our staff members were so almost paralyzed by this. How do I enter home? Do I need to stay in a hotel? Can I even go home? And a lot of it stems from we don't know if we can kill our loved ones by just bringing it home to them. And, the kicker of the whole story could be that, here we are in the hospital doing everything we can right. Yeah. And we're protected and isolated, and we're not spreading it amongst ourselves. We're not getting it from the patient. And then one of our kids goes out and plays with a neighbor's kid, and they bring it back and kill us. You know what I mean? Here we are taking all these precautions, but the scenario where it might actually happen, it may not be that I'm bringing it home because I'm taking all these precautions. It may actually be something like that. So, I mean, I'll share with you a little story, and this is us in March. So March, everyone's freaking out about everything. Everything. Are you coughing? Are you having fevers? I never had a temperature. In fact, my temperature was probably lower than it's been for an entire month. I think it was the stress of it all. Yeah. Every day I would check, it would say 97.9. There was one day it said 99.4. On that day, it was unusual because everyone in the house was a little, everyone was tired. And my daughter had a fever that day. She was hanging out with her cousin, who is also in a medical family. So, we cohorted our kids together because if they're going to get it, we know we're going to get it because we're in the same line of fire. We're playing with a beast we don't know about. So, my niece got something that looked like diarrhea and fevers, and it went away for her in a day. My daughter got something like that. Then all my kids got something like that. Then my wife didn't get out of bed for 24 hours. And this is a lady, all right? This is a woman who is so strong that I could be, normal flu knocks me out for a day, but she'll be charging with the kids to like practices and doing stuff.
It's called woman.
It's true. Women are strong.
They're stronger than that.
They're strong, but this is the first time I've seen something knock her out. And that was the only time in that entire month it wasn't even a fever. It was 99.4. So it wouldn't even qualify as one. I had a headache and a temperature of 99.4. If that was it, then I hate to say it, we got it, but not from me bringing it home, likely from the kids. Oh. So, this whole opening up the school thing and all this
Yeah, that
other
was the
stuff
next
going
question.
on.
And what's happening? LA School District said they're closing down. I have other friends, and I always ask this question to my friends: if I had kids, I don't know if I'd send them to school. And then they look at the numbers on how many deaths there are with the flu every year, influenza, the Spanish flu. I mean, they've gone through all this. Because we were seeing a decrease up in your area, Maryland, you were seeing a decrease. Right now, it's spiking big time up down there in Florida. It's spiking back here in California. It's popping up in Montana. It's popping up in different states that really didn't have any cases. And I think
It's because it didn't go in the normal pattern. It went reverse. And I don't think people were prepared because they thought, oh, if it passed, it probably just passed us. Remember, the normal flu and viral pattern is West Coast to East Coast.
Yeah.
And this time it went East Coast to West Coast.
Well, don't they do one back before? I was going to ask you about flu shots later, but now we're here. But don't they usually do flu shot testing or come up with an antibody in flu shots from East Coast to West Coast? Or when they do
University of Washington, where our virologist, our top dog sits, our number one, the crew that studies viruses as they enter the country. They study it on the West Coast. On the East Coast, we develop policy, and we have the NIH, and we have all the testing labs and the virology labs, Amgen, and all these big giants sitting here making flu shots and all this other stuff we use. So you're right. You're actually right. Some of the flu vaccines will come out of here, but they're built on knowledge and data that comes from here. So
from the year prior,
from the West Coast. Yeah,
but I know,
year prior.
So West Coast, Washington, but aren't they coming up with these flu shots that were from the flu from prior the previous year?
So I don't know the definite answer on this. I don't know about the different answer of this, but what I do know is they kind of predictably model what may be coming next. They're right. They're right probably 50% of the time, and they've been wrong some of the time too. So, and we know that because I get the flu shot yearly. It's part of working in the hospital.
That was my next question.
So I get the flu shot yearly. It's just part of working in the hospital. They try to mitigate the risk a little bit. Some years it works really well, and I know that because I'm dealing with a lot of people coughing and sneezing in my face. I may get, like I said, not even a temperature, but a cough for like 24 hours and it's gone.
Yeah.
That's the year I know that the flu shot was perfect. But there have been years where we didn't have a perfect shot, like the years we got swine flu and bird flu.
Yeah.
And I still remember in 2008 getting that flu, that horrible, nasty flu that came around. And the reason why I remember it was 5 days of fevers. And one day I was just like, I can't get off the floor, and that's never happened to me. Right. Till then.
Knocked your ass down, huh?
Knocked me out. I was wheezing for a good week after that. So I don't understand, what the variations are. That's for the virologists and the scientists to determine. But that flu vaccine didn't do anything for me, and that virus definitely knocked me out. And that was a year that we were off. Obviously, it was a shift. It was an epidemic that spread, and we experienced it. So we had a small shift in the genome, and it got us. But for the most part, they predictively modeled, and we treat.
Yeah.
But what happened this time wasn't the same as all those. This is not the flu. This is a lot nastier. I mean, let me get into what acute respiratory distress syndrome is. So when we say SARS, we're talking about a syndrome. We're not just talking about a regular virus. When we say this virus causes SARS, it causes severe acute respiratory distress syndrome. It's a constellation of reactions that have led to what we call a cytokine storm. So the biology on this, I'm a microbiologist, by the way. That's what I did at Berkeley. So the biology on this I find fascinating. It's beyond where I remember where I left in college, and where we are now is a completely beautiful world of intracellular communication that we didn't know before. But your body, when it fights an infection, goes through a whole bunch of defenses. There's one line of defenses. There's a B cell defense, a T cell defense, a humoral defense, 3 lines of defense. So you have one army that's out there detecting bad guys and just passively killing it off, macrophages and stuff of that nature. And that's that humoral defense, which just roams around your body. And you have a set that's targeted, and they have 2 armies, one to detect and one to kind of store the information and kind of go back and get it again. That B and T cell army that sits on the side is what's responsible for antibody-mediated responses. So you have a passive response that happens at all times to all foreign bodies, and you have an active response. For people who develop SARS, your actively engaged part of the system is so heavily engaged and so entrenched in this battle that it gets close to killing you, and it creates this syndrome. So the syndrome starts with a storm. We call it a cytokine storm, and that storm revs up the whole system. The system becomes leaky, permeable, so all these cells can move around and attack bad guys, and it starts attacking everything. And that's where everything is lost. And that's what leads to this syndrome where the lungs become so leaky and permeable that it floods with inflammation and fluids, and a person can't breathe because the lung tissue is become a sponge. Instead of a sponge for gas exchange, it's become a wet sponge. So what do we have to do in that scenario? That's a scenario where we need a ventilator. That's a scenario where we need to do positive pressure ventilation. So it's a whole different monster.
So with the ventilator, what's the purpose of putting the patient into a coma? Are they manually doing that, or how does that work? I mean, you normally hear ventilators and coma putting together. You saw that in Italy. I'm assuming you see it here as well.
So there's standard approaches to this, and a lot of it comes from old data. The ICUs and the way we do this have existed for many, many, many years. So if you take a person and you were just to shove a tube in them and put them on a machine, yes, you can breathe for them, but the trauma of that whole experience will in itself generate PTSD. That's been shown over and over again. So you can actually induce trauma by saving people without appropriate sedation. So the sedation is set up for two issues. One is, okay, if you're conscious and during this process and you saw a tube in your mouth and you saw all the stuff happening around you, there's going to be a realm of panic that's going to make you do a couple things. One is want to run out of there, and 2 is want to pull that tube out, which in itself will pose a danger. So keeping people sedated is part of the protocol, mostly for their safety. The other issue is there are going to be scenarios.
Both sides safety.
Yeah, it's to psychologically save the body and also to physically save it from harm. The other issue is some of that sedation and that comatose state is muscle-related comatoseness. You have to turn the muscles off so, there isn't any extra pull or push. And that's when someone really needs a special type of ventilation. They'll use muscular blocking as part of that coma. So, that coma state is to treat different disorders, and our ICU docs are very, very adept at making sure they select the right type. So, when ICU medications are used in the wrong setting, we see things happen. Like, how did Michael Jackson die? The Michael Jackson scenario was he was using what we use normally to put people in a comatose state, Diprovan, and he was using that in his home setting to get sleep at home, which is very unusual.
Is that the same as propofol, or is it
Yeah, Diprovan is the trade name for propofol.
Gotcha.
It's the same thing. So the generic name for propofol is Diprovan.
Wow.
So the scenario we're running isn't pretty. You have a virus. The virus is not the nice guy as like a normal flu is. And you have this syndrome that happens to a small percentage, a significant though, but small percentage of the population. And it causes a mild, a moderate, and a severe disorder. The mild one is temporarily needing oxygen and having trouble breathing that goes away. Those are the mild cases. That's probably God, man, that was it's definitely not the mortality portion. So you multiply the mortality times 10, because there were 10 people we sent out the door for every 1 to 2 that die. That would be the estimate. So multiply that number by just say 10 to keep it easy to remember. Then if you take the next cohort, it's a cohort that really, really struggled with it. So they had moderate disease, but they never got to a point where they needed a ventilator. This is where we made the biggest breakthroughs as clinicians. And why? Because we learned how to use oxygen. We learned how to use a technique called pronation. We learned how to try to dodge the ICU by using steroids. We had medications we didn't have before, like remdesivir and antiviral. If given early, sometimes makes the disease a little milder. So for this group that's in that moderate category, we had probably an improved survival. Then we had the group that crashed. And, out of that group, some of them make it, some of them don't. The numbers are horrible.
And is that in all groups too, or are you seeing more in the elderly population?
It's all ages.
Yeah.
It's all ages. And
are your beds full right now? Because a lot of, I have friends that are nurses and doctors throughout the country, and they say, you know what, we've been empty.
We've been fortunate.
Yeah.
Our wave, our curve looks just like a bell.
Yeah. So
this would have been March, and then we hit April, and then we hit May, and now we're out here where, our utilization right now is at 20 beds, which, when we hit that peak that was above 100 in the middle, this is manageable, and it's not a lot of new cases. So maybe one every couple days, which at one point in time it was, it was handfuls a day just flooding in. So our numbers are good. And if we stay lucky and people keep doing their duty, because I heard a public health guy say this, and it rings in my ears. Public health, when it works right, you don't even know what's happening. It's just seamless. It's just hand washing. Yeah. Good hand washing preventing diarrhea on cruise ships. It's all those little things that are out there that just kind of happen. It's the kids at the playground washing their hands before they eat and come into the cafeteria. I mean, all these kind of little things that get implemented in. This is public health. And what we have right now is what I call public health catastrophe and failure. And the reason in America, compared to the rest of the world, isn't really the public health system as much as the population. It's a strange scenario. I mean, look at the guys in Europe and look at the guys in all these other places. They isolated, watched their numbers hit a critical low, and then they opened up society. Here we're like, let's open it up. We need our bars. My afro, it's huge. I need to get this haircut. Like
back hair.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to think of the excuse that we failed in the public health spectrum. Was it a lack of education about masks? I don't know.
Ready to
was it politics and everything hitting the wrong way? That's part of the problem. Yeah. There are people out there, and I see this on my feed all the time. They think by saying what I'm saying, I'm attacking the president. And I'm like sitting there holding my head going, I did not even use the word Trump anywhere in this statement. I'm not even trying to point fingers that maybe he could have done it better. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just talking about the facts. And people come at you like, Doc, you're wrong. You've drank the Kool-Aid. And I'm always like, what the hell are you guys talking about? This is a public health catastrophe. And it's been spun out of control because it's an election year. And if you add to that all the partisan politics, and if you add to that the fact that everyone's looking for a reason to, the people that support our president, they're looking for a reason to reelect him at all costs necessary. You could have the whole country die, but he needs to be our president. And I'm like looking at the world going, I'm not going to fight that. That's your battle, but wear a mask.
Wear a mask.
Just for God's sake, do your duty. Protect your fellow citizen. I'm not asking you to cut off your arm and give it to me so I can give it to someone else. I am not asking for your kidney. I am not asking for your liver. I'm not asking for your eyeball. Just a mask. Well, good hand washing and a mask. Hey, if you're going to meet somebody and you don't want to wear a mask, maintain the distance more than 6 feet so that if that person's breathing passively the organism, it's not in your oral pharynx and causing a new person to spread it on further. You know, these are just measures. These measures are called public health interventions, PHI. We do public health interventions when we don't have a cure. All right? I want everyone that doesn't want to wear a mask and everyone that doesn't want to wash their hands and everyone that doesn't want to space out to tell me what's the cure to this disease. And if you're going to tell me, well, 98% of the population is going to survive, then do you really realize that there may be a quarter of the population that's going to have long-standing lung disease, some form of heart disease, complications of a stroke? They're going to live. Yeah, man, they're going to live. Yeah, we're 98% live. But the ongoing morbidity and mortality, what morbidity and mortality means, the ongoing consequences of this disease are beyond how many die. The ones that live aren't going to live normal. They're going to have some sort of trouble. They're going to feel this. How long is that going to last? What does that entail for the economy? And then I keep seeing economic arguments because, yes, you shut down the economy, and I hate to say this, more people would die of starvation than of this disorder. That's absolutely right. If we shut everything down and there were so many people living paycheck to paycheck, and we had no way to feed them, house them, and clothe them, there are going to be so many kids, so many elderly, and so many folks just on the street dying. And that's a reality of having a pandemic. That was the reason to isolate and test and figure this out and stop it from spreading. And we did not do that in this country. We have not done that in this country. We've continued to fail at that in this country.
Well, we don't, I mean, just this week, you know, they closed everything down again. The bars, the gyms, the indoor.
Our numbers are through the roof. How many cases per day?
I don't know why they even opened up in the first place. I know we need to get the economy going, but I just think safety is first. And it's, you know, I have friends in the restaurant business. Do I go to work today? Do I not go to work today? Do I have a job? Do I not have a job? You know, my brother's in the wine business for the past 20-something years, you know, and he's like, everything has shut down. It is affected. Boom, boom, boom. What do you say? I mean, when I go to the store, like, I have my gloves on, I have my mask on, and, you know, and I was already that guy. Even in our wedding vows, Corinne talked about.
No way. You did that?
No, Corinne talked about hand sanitizer. You know, and so that's just been me forever. So I was ahead of this game on being extra cautious. I get on a plane, I wipe everything down, and people look at them like, bleach wipes, you want it? They said, you know what? Never thought about it, but yes. You know, so. You know, but now, you know, it's the truth now. The one that gets me, and not to make a joke about this, but they go to the store with the gloves, the mask, they get the cart, they get all the stuff, they get in the car, and then they put everything in the car, and then they drive away with their gloves and mask on, and now they've contaminated the whole inside of the car. You know, I just think, I don't understand that. Or they're driving by themselves in the car with their mask and gloves on. Is that helpful? And maybe it's from the air, because what about prior this conversation you were talking about, someone asked, can a fart, what would you say, can a fart spread coronavirus? And the truth is yes, right?
So I'll share that. So part one, the gloves got to go. People don't need to wear gloves around town. I think it promotes a couple bad habits. We're going to waste away a bunch of resources.
Okay.
I see gloves littering parking lots. I mean, gloves have turned into a nuisance. You're better off with hand sanitizer and good hand washing. You know, before you enter, before you exit, that's one way. So we call it swipe in, swipe out. Or, you know, the other way is, if you really want to conserve the amount of hand sanitizer you use, the only time you use it is right before you eat. Anything that enters this space, that's when your hands have to be clean. So if you're going to feed, you're going to clean, you're going to touch these hands better be sterile. So, you know, they're different. They're different approaches, but the main thing is,
I mean, this thing is one of the dirtiest things around. I mean, I'm constantly
that, and there were some funny dollar bill stories where people sent dollar bills to bankers, after they microwaved them. But the fart thing is interesting because, in the midst of this whole March, April chaos, there were a couple articles I read that really got me laughing and got me going, okay, at least we can laugh about it a little bit. But there was a study in Australia, and these guys are crazy because they said, could a fart pass coronavirus on? And the surprising answer is yes. So then they studied it, and they were studying, does it flow? How does it move? And they're like, yes, a fart can definitely pass coronavirus on, was the conclusion. Because I hate to say this, in poor countries, when they're testing to figure out if corona is spreading through a population, they have to do a pooled study. So some people will test sewage, and if the sewage is positive, they know that there are people with coronavirus in that community. They'll test pooled blood samples because you can test thousands of people with one sample, and if it turns out positive, they know they have to start screening that population. So pooled studies. So we know that it's in poop, it's in the air. If you're in a small space and someone farts, they're sharing with you. Wow. So the end conclusion is, what was the recommendation from these Australian doctors? So they said no one should ride bare bottom.
Okay.
They said the layers at least keep it from spreading all over the place. Some of it gets caught. So no one should travel bare bottom.
No one should travel bare bottom. I think we have that covered here. That speaking about traveling, I traveled nonstop for work. And I'm kind of enjoying the break of not being on a plane. I mean, there are days I used to work for a travel website and magazine, and there were days I'd wake up, where am I? What city am I in? I mean, the old Southwest airline commercial. Remember the guy's rock stars up there, and he says, "Good night, Detroit," when you're not in Detroit, and he says, what it says, "Got to get away." That was their campaign. Got to get away.
Right.
Take Southwest Airline. But I was like that. I'd wake up. What city am I in right now? And so, but this topic comes up with people all the time about traveling. You think it's safe to go on a vacation or safe to go over here? Airlines are offering cheap flights. I'm not into. I wouldn't travel right now. I would maybe drive somewhere, but I wouldn't get on a plane. I don't think I'd get on a train.
You bring up a very, very important question, and this is why it's important. We're human.
Yeah.
And as humans, if we're in a caged environment, I think part of the craziness also isn't just the economy, the politics. We've been caged. We are used to exploring and finding and going out and seeing stuff.
I'm hearing, my friends.
It's summer. You and I are looking at each other on a screen, man. There are no waves in the background here. I'm pretending there's an ocean right here.
And you're flying your kite, right? Here's the ocean.
Right? Here I am. So, the answer is we need to find ways to get away that are safe. We need to get away. We need to find ways that are safe. Otherwise, our mental health will take a toll. During this whole pandemic, were there places we could go and isolate and go? The answer is most cities, yes. New York City, a little bit harder. Yeah. San Francisco, a little bit harder. But, I saw places where they put grid marks on the floor so everyone knows where to stand, in concentrated places. But the answer is we need to find healthy ways to get away that are safe. So in parts of the, and you could track everyone's public health, department, in places where they're at the lower end of that curve, in places where they have precautions in place, in places where they've thought about seating and how people are going to sit in that dining room. How are people going to travel to this hotel? What is their cleaning procedure? Is their staff wearing masks? Do they have a way to kind of separate everything out? There are places that have already thought about this. Like, the Jersey Shore is one that, for us, it's an easy getaway. You just go up the highway. Yeah. And if you get up there, you find that they have all these arrangements in place because they've already gone through the worst of the pandemic. And they're taking every precaution they can not to see it again. And they understand that they need to have an economy. And they need to figure out ways to innovate and make a new economy for their state. Yeah. And places that innovate are going to survive, and places that don't innovate are not. And so while everyone's fighting about masks, I want them to everyone to take a step back. You want your economy to come back. You have to find ways to make it safe for everyone. That's number one. The economy will surge once we have a safe way to live and travel and do all these things. Two, are there places you can go that don't have a lot of people? The answer is yes. We have all these natural parks and places that are now open again.
I'm hearing hikers. A friend of mine, their kids went hiking with another couple, and all four of them came back with it. And so when will, I mean, I go down the street and I'm an avid cyclist and a runner, and I see people just panicking, grabbing, mask when you see you coming around the corner, and it's sad. You see it in the grocery store, and it's like that movie Outbreak. I watched that movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman and Rene Russo, I think, back in
You
March.
brought something scary, though. I'm going to share something scary. You brought up something. You brought running. France, in the beginning, banned all the running in their city. Do you know why?
Why?
Any ideas?
Spit.
Because
Air.
well, there's they call it a slipstream.
Uh-huh.
So as you're running, you're generating like a halo around you of everything you're breathing.
Yeah.
Now, if there's no breeze and it's not very warm, there's nothing to kind of prevent that from lingering. If you have heat, you have humidity, and you have a breeze, it's not staying over you and following you. The physics of it changes. So these people running, and behind them is a stream of their air, just kind of. So in France, they said, okay, that's a danger too, and they stopped all of that. I mean, the reason why these guys were successful in Europe is probably more to do with they recognized their population and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and they took measures to go, hey, if we stop that, that will cut off this percentage. If we do stop that, that'll cut off this percentage. If they took a scientific approach, I don't know what we're doing, man.
No, I same thing in Belgium. I used to live in Belgium, and I was talking to my friends, and they're not able to go.
They bike. Don't they bike a lot?
They can only. I was talking to them, and they can only go for a daily walk with that same individual. So it's either the husband and wife go, or the husband goes with one kid, or the wife goes with one kid, and they were even being stopped to go across town, and they'd be stopped, and they'd say, "Wait a minute, you don't live in this area. What are you doing over here?" And they would become fine. You were talking about the airstream behind. I even heard, is there any truth behind this, that some of this has been brought over through Asia, through Europe to here, or vice versa, through the airstream of a jet stream? Is that any truth behind that?
Jet stream's hot. That would be it would be very difficult to do. I
mean, what do you say about all these theories out there that are out there?
Viruses aren't built to survive outside of the body for too long. So, we can come up with all sorts of hypotheses. Like HIV only lasts 9 minutes on the surface. It's not going to last much longer than that. Like a lot of these viruses they're not like their own living organism. Yeah. They need another organism to live. The reason why these organisms are living is because we're passing them on. We're a human vector. We are spreading the virus. It needs us to spread. We could come up with all sorts of theories. I spit on the floor, and then I didn't clean it for this. It's not going to live forever, man. It needs the body to live. I was on a doorknob. Well, how did that doorknob end up in your nostril?
Gotcha. So do you think you'll ever shake hands again? Shake hands, hug? I mean, is there any of that?
I'm back to the old Asian way right now.
We do elbow bumps here or foot bumps.
Namaste, it's good to know you. Exactly. May your soul be healthy. May you be a great person. I'm back to the old ways.
Probably safer, the long distance high five. Earlier you were talking about SARS, which made into the news a few years ago. And then there was also H1N1. What's the difference between them? Is it the same thing, just a different name? Because there's 19 stages of COVID. Is that the way you would describe it as well, as a COVID-19, or is it because it initiated, in 2019? And are we going to see, what's the difference?
If I were to be blunt, the president said it right when he called it Wuhan 2019. The way we're probably going to name it is location it started and year it started. So as far as we know, it started in Wuhan, China, 2019. So Wuhan flu, Chinese flu is a valid way to look at this. 2019 is the year it started.
Yeah. Right.
SARS-1 is what you're asking about. In 2003, that spread across the planet with a 35% incidence of death. It was very hard to miss. There were a lot of learning points from that, but it did cause the respiratory distress syndrome. And a lot of people didn't survive that. It was lethal. The countries that it hit were mostly in Asia. And then as close to it got to us here was Toronto, Canada. So the Canadians have experienced SARS before. And one little point that we should all notice, countries that have had SARS did far better than countries that didn't when it came to how to handle this whole pandemic.
What's happening now?
Those are the countries that said, oh, we saw this before. We saw a lot of people die. And this is what we're going to do. Should you want to get it, go ahead. But the rest of us don't want to die. Now that differs. So that's SARS, right? Remember SARS-1, 2003 to 2004. This is the Wuhan flu or COVID-19, whatever name we're going to give it in the future. And it sits right here as the second SARS that we've seen and this one spread because it has asymptomatic spread and there are a lot of people that survive. If a lot of people didn't survive this, it wouldn't have spread this bad. If most of your population that gets it dies, it doesn't make it to the next person. This one is easily transmitted. Then you said H1N1.
Yeah.
So H1N1 is a flu species, and flu doesn't get and become SARS except for very rarely. So, and the only reason I know this is I did see a couple cases when it came out. I actually treated and actively worked on saving a young adult who had fever, and right before things went bad, we had her in the ICU and she survived. But it didn't look like this. It was a lot easier. It was just 5 days on a vent. She was off and doing fine. That's all I'm going to say. I won't give any details, but it was a simpler, easier to treat beast. This SARS, compared to that H1N1 cytokine storm, which is rare, not going to happen very common at all, this is very easy to treat. And this one is so elusive and difficult. I mean, some of the stuff we're discovering doesn't make any sense. Megakaryocyte-driven inflammation and all the other stuff, and blood clots, and increased risk of heart disease. And so this beast we're dealing with is a nasty, nasty, evil piece of work. H1N1, when I compare it mentally, I'm like, that was so easy. Yeah, it sucked having the flu, but most of us are going to live, and those who get it bad, there was no demand for ICU and ventilators then because you might see 1 in a million or 1 in a couple 100,000 that fall off the edge. 2% of the population of America is 7 million people. I'm not talking about a small number. It's 7 million people. Multiply that times 10 to get maybe how many need the hospital. 70 million need a hospital?
And not everyone goes to the hospital because a lot of people I talk to, I don't want to go to the hospital because something could be there as well. And so, did you see that in your hospital that people should?
We saw some crazy stuff when COVID went like this. The amount of people that entered the ER went like this.
Yeah.
No, they're like, if I'm having a heart attack, I'm going to die at home. I don't want COVID. I'm like thinking to myself, you're having a heart attack. We still have all the resources to take care of you and save you. You should be here, not at home dying. But the population naturally was fearful. And should they have been? The honest answer is no. We have every precaution in the world. You're more likely to get COVID walking out there than you are inside a place that's taking all these precautions. HEPA filters, negative pressure areas. I mean, our ability to survive in that hospital is going to be pretty good. But if you're in a closed space, and it's floating around, your chances are better out there to get it. So if you're having a stroke, a heart attack, or a life-threatening emergency, and there's COVID present in that community, you should still go to that emergency room and get help. Your stroke can be treated. Your heart disease can be treated. COVID right now, we can find a way to help you through it. But untreated, all of this is deadly.
You mentioned ARDS earlier. Can you describe what that is? And it affects the lungs, right?
So SARS and ARDS have a relationship. So the severest version of ARDS looks like SARS. Okay. ARDS is a reaction that's just limited. Mostly we think about it as a lung problem. And it's a respiratory problem that requires a vent. That's a respiratory problem where you have sepsis or viral issue or a major infection causing the lungs to become leaky. They flood with fluid. And just like that SARS, you're putting them on a ventilator, and it's for a smaller period of time, and then they come off. The pressure modes and stuff used here are used in SARS too. This is the severe form of that.
Okay.
This is the form that we always see, and this is the one that we worry about. 28 days on a ventilator doesn't happen in H1N1. It didn't happen in any of our flu pandemics and epidemics and stuff in history at the time. People did not need 28 days. Why does this one require 28? I don't know. It's that severe.
And we still don't know, because you even talked about the repercussions of this even 20 years down the road, right? That something may come about, just like we saw at 9/11. A lot of people were having lung cancer after 9/11, 10, 12 years later. And so are we going to see this? Hopefully not, but do you predict this?
If I were to predict the future, there are a couple things. First, is there going to be a general change in the way we operate as a global community?
Yeah.
Because we had a respiratory virus spread so rapidly across the globe that there was no barrier to protect groups and groups of people. So there is going to be some changes that are going to have to be, they're just structurally going to have to happen operationally to protect the entire globe of, billions of people. So that's one thing, just package on the side. So I think that what we're going to look like 10 or 20 years from now, hopefully, is a cleaner, well-operating, global, international community of folks who recognize, if I don't wash my hands here, then that guy on the other side of the globe is not washing his hands too. We're eventually going to trade something. All this global trade, we're going to trade something back and forth.
Oh, that is one thing, excuse me, from traveling as much as I did. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. And the one that get me, and sorry if I'm grossing any of our listeners out, but seeing pilots walk out of the bathroom without washing their hands. I'm thinking,
just kind of doing this thing.
They're not even doing that. I mean, I'm thinking, excuse my language, I'd say, you got to be shitting me. Really? You're a pilot and you're not going to wash your hands after coming out of the stall? And it's that type of thing. And so exactly what you're talking about. You're walking through there. So that's the part that Crin would just laugh at me.
Hopefully he didn't fart too.
Yeah, well,
double whammy. Double whammy.
Double whammy is right. But I mean, I wipe everything down. I have my little portable air filter here. I wipe everything with bleach wipes. And, and so, but you are right.
So that's part one. That's change number one. That's global, international, how everyone operates as a public health globe. Public health has to go, if Ebola were to spread, what would we have done? We would have all sorts of crap we would have done. We would do everything in our power to stop Ebola. It shouldn't leave from that port and enter our port. All those precautions would have also helped prevent this too. If we were temperature checking people as they traveled, we have good hand hygiene. We limit Ebola, but we also limit this guy. So there's something global that has to happen to stop that. That's one. Then there's two. 70 million people had the infection or had an infection that got them into the hospital or into some form of healthcare. This 70 million people, as they go through life, what are the consequences? Their lungs, even after they recover, look pretty awful. Some of these guys have had strokes. Some of these guys have had blood clots. Some of these guys are going to have limb amputations. Some of these guys are going to, have all sorts of consequences of this disorder that we're still figuring out. And the way to treat it is controversial, because I've seen people go aggressive and light on just anticoagulation. And if you go aggressive with anticoagulation, people bleed. And if you go light on anticoagulation, they come back with blood clots. What's the right way to do that? We don't know. So what I know is this is us now, plus there are people who've got it. We have 3 million now. That's a large number of people that have it. The mortality of that we know is 133 right now, probably going to rise. And out of this group that survives, we know that they're going to have trouble periodically. Does that mean that their life expectancy went like this? Does that mean that the complications disabled a larger portion of our American society? And just the effects of that, just the loss of life, the loss of intelligent folks out there that, probably were dedicating their lives to saving everyone. The folks that I've lost, my brothers and sisters in battle. It's the consequences of that alone are severe. And 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, the consequences of just having the disorder, a lot of us are going to find out. But I'm under the one to kind of look at it scientifically.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of disorders that we classify as idiopathic. And when we talk about them, I used to jokingly say, idiot doctor, we just don't know what causes it. And we have a constellation of these disorders out there that we're like, we don't know what causes it, but it happens. People develop lung fibrosis. Some people get it out of the blue. We don't know why. They were not even smokers. How did they get it? And the answer is we're probably seeing that now. We might be seeing a virus inflame the lungs and damage it. And years later, this might be somebody with pulmonary fibrosis. And so it's going to go back in history and time, and we might be able to reclassify these guys as, viral related, subtle SARS related pulmonary fibrosis. It's going to get a name somewhere. But what we're seeing now is definitely going to be related to disease later. And what we're seeing now in the people that we've lost some really good people. And
at all ages, in all different types of lifestyles, healthy, unhealthy. I mean,
some of the nurses we lost were only in their 30s. Some of them barely made it into their 40s. Some of the respiratory therapists we're talking about, we're not talking about 80-year-olds, trying to, resuscitate people. I mean, we have lost a lot of people. So it's one of the reasons why it's really hard to talk about this. And it goes kind of like this. If anything I post about how bad the disorder is, I get hit with lots of bad flack from people. Oh, you're just a doctor. Oh, you drank the Kool-Aid. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, this is and this is all part of a bigger conspiracy, and you're part of that wheel now. And I'm like sitting there going, would I lose my best friend in a conspiracy? Would I want to see 2,000 years of medical knowledge and all of these professionals disappear off the face of the earth? Would I go out of my way to call something evil when it really is evil? This virus is the nastiest thing we have right now, and we don't have a way to stop it. And to see people just spread it, and spread it openly. Oh, let's have a party. Let's invite everyone over and see who gets it first. Ha 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 ha.
I've heard that people are having pools, money pools, on see who gets it first, and whoever gets it gets the pot. I mean,
what's the mental disorder there? There has to be a mental disorder, because it's reckless, and that recklessness could make us lose someone else that's very near and dear to us. And how many losses later are we going to realize that was not a good idea? Let's grow up, people. Let's wear our adult pants. Let's put on our adult responsibility to each other as part of a society and start thinking about that. You save people's lives and you work on everything you can to save them, and then you see this and you're just like, what is this? What is this we're in? So the only way I've been able to label it is I'm sitting in a dumpster fire, John. It's a smelly, fart-filled, cloud-filled dumpster fire. And I've been able to laugh about it more in the last couple weeks, but it's really hard for healthcare workers out there, especially our nurses.
Totally.
It's just really hard to understand how we can go from, watching people die and then everyone telling us, no, they didn't die. You're over-reporting that death. That death was, you're not seeing them die. I'm like, oh, I guess this is how I should practice medicine. John, really?
It's tough. You know, we all live in a society now. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and it's disappointing. You know, I personally don't watch any news because it's just, you know, it's just bad news over and over and over and over and over, and it's just like, goodness gracious, you know, and it's tough. Long-term chronic pain with this, you know, because we have a lot of patients that are going through a lot of different things. PTSD is one of them. You know, I got rear-ended yesterday driving back home. I had PTSD watching all the cars, you know, getting too close, coming off the freeway. Are they going to stop? You know, coming up to a stop sign. Are they going to stop? So I can see, and that was me. You know, I didn't think, you know, I'm like, how did this affect me? So little things like this affect people. You know, it took me, you know, my lifestyle is home office. Afternoon, I get on my bike or go for a run.
John,
you know, and I'm
between me and you,
yeah,
every healthcare worker that had to watch someone die without their family is going to go through PTSD. And every healthcare worker out there that, you know, what participated in trying to save a life during a period of time where they couldn't see their family very well is going to go through some sort of psychological catastrophe from this. The ER doctor that committed suicide, this is a well-known, renowned, you know, state-of-the-art genius that ended her life. I mean,
young too.
Beautiful, you know, young, healthy, you know, everything that you would want out of your professional taking care of you. And she ended her life. And the honest answer is, you saw that after a fender bender. We're seeing a fender bender. During that peak, we were seeing a fender bender every single day. And there's only so much you can do. And what's the cure? We don't have a cure.
And that's the thing. When will this end? My brother's best friend lives down in Santa Barbara. His mom and his dad got it back in March. I think he was in Simi Valley down that way. Married for 50 plus years, and his wife was not allowed into the hospital, and he had to pass. He passed alone. And I'm thinking back, you know what? If that was Corinne in that hospital and they wouldn't let me in there, you better believe I would have made it to that hospital. I would have been by her side. I would have kissed her and said, "Scoot over. I'll be with you in 2 weeks." If that was the reason. But you know, those are the stories that really hit home to me. It's like, you have a beautiful life. Doesn't matter if you're 2-year-old or 92 years old, and have to pass alone. Sorry, they're in quarantine. You can't come in here. And do you see that in your hospital? Are you guys that strict where you're not allowing
When we first started, every hospital in our area was a quarantine site. So you could only come in if you had a reason to be there. So chest pain, you know, stroke, COVID, you know, all the standard reasons. Once you came in, you weren't allowed any visitors unless you were dying. And it wasn't, we kind of fought for this. All of us fought for this, the nurses, the techs, everyone, because if someone's dying alone, who's going to hold their hand? That's us.
Well, you know what? That's exactly what happened. My mom and I were on a walk, and we saw this lady. She had a cute puppy dog. We started talking, and I said, she goes, "Hey, I didn't need any more dogs." I said, "We'll take it." She goes, "Actually, it's my sister, and she worked for the airlines, and she passed." I said, "When?" She just recently from COVID. And I was like, oh. I said, "I'm so sorry." And so she said, I said, "Were you with her?" She goes, "They wouldn't let me in there, but the nurse stood by her side." She said, "I want to let you know, I was with," I'll get emotional now too. "I was with your sister to the very end. And I just want to let you know, there was a lot of love there." And so you going into that you were the loved one holding the hand,
that's all of us, man. All of us, everyone, we can't. This is where it's really hard. How can humanity fall apart into this chaos that you and I are seeing right now? We are human. We love, we care, we are human. first the first couple weeks of this, I remember not being able to sleep, man. No. I could not sleep.
It's real life.
John, the reason why I like you is when we first met, you shared your story and your life and all you've been through. And since then, I knew you are a honest, hardworking man who cares deeply about what you do. You want to see this world get better. I do too. That's why I feel like we're in this fight together. By sharing the truth, by sharing what we've been through, we will uplift more people and we will save them. When this pandemic started and I wasn't sleeping, I shared a video. And that video went out to thousands of people. And it was just meant for my family and friends. And it basically told them that this is real, that this is dangerous, and that I want them to protect themselves by wearing at least a mask. And that this is a fecal oral transmitted beast, and I don't want to see anyone else die. And I shared it. It's the ugliest video of me you'll ever see. It's in my little office, hiding away, bunkered away. That 3 weeks of no sleep, just realizing that there is no one saving the population, and there's no one educating everybody about why. So if we are able to help a few more people, take a few more precautions so that more people can survive and not get this disorder, we did something. And, you know, as a doc, we'll keep trying to find a way to make this livable, to help more people survive with every piece of technology and resource we have. But, you know, we do this together, and we do this because that's what we do. We signed up for this, whether we like it or not, and sharing the truth and sharing these experiences and watching, you know, really nice, hardworking people put themselves into that fire, all the way down to our janitorial staff. I mean, they're panicked just like everyone else. And to make sure everyone was protected and had the right gear, to make sure everyone knew what they were doing and took every precaution they could to protect their families and themselves, that is our responsibility. As people, as part of a greater society, and as part of now a globe. So if there's any global conspiracy, I'll tell you it's this, that whatever disease hits us here is going to hit people everywhere. And if that's a global conspiracy or a global issue, goddamn is. And there is nothing that you and I can do to change that. We live in a society that transacts and trades and pushes stuff from one end of the globe to the other. And as long as that exists, so will disease and transmission. And if you don't want Ebola to come to your doorstep, then you should do your part. And if you don't want, you know, dengue fever to come to this place, or Zika, or any of these other disorders, the hundreds of disorders out there that don't make it to our shore, then you do your part. And that's the important part. You know, we as humans are sharing this space together. You know, you're sharing your time with me, John. I'm sharing my thoughts with you. And we grow every time we do this. We learn, we grow, we become better people. And that's valuable.
You know, I thank you. You know, I have a bunch more questions, but I think that's a perfect way to end it right now. But how you mentioned, do your part. Do your part. And that's heavy. because I see it on the the digital signs on the freeway. Do your part. Wash your hands. Stay 6 feet. And there's a reason they're saying that. And you're seeing it being on the front line. I mean, you see a lot more than a lot of people see. I'd say 99% of the population. So I was going to go into other things, and I'd love to get you back on the show too. But can you share? Because I want, I like having people come on the show and be able to share what they do and how to find you. And so I know you do a lot for your patients, not only on the medical side in the hospital, but also on the medical cannabis side. And so, can you share how people, our followers, can find you? And I'll definitely put these links down for you as well.
So the easiest way to find us is aryawellness.com. So that's ARYA wellness.com. That'll link up to our main page and our scheduling and emails and places to submit questions, all of that stuff. We have a Facebook page. Feel free to leave comments or message me through there. We have an Instagram page. Those are the three dominant ways to send messages to me if you don't have any other options. We also have our central phone number. That's 877-862-0303. And our main email address is still aryawellness@greenlotus.center. That goofy name stuck with me. I don't know why, John. I'll tell you later. But those are the main ways to get a hold of us.
Any closing words for our audience?
In these difficult times, it's very important to come together. We see so many people tearing people apart. We see the media doing what the media does. We even see a president who wants to win an election to the point where he's ripping the population apart. We see all sorts of stuff ripping us apart. And this isn't the time for that. When we're losing lives and when we're losing loved ones, this is the last time I want someone to be alone. We need to come together as people. When you isolate, that doesn't mean socially isolate. That means you physically isolate 6 feet. You could still talk to people. You could still meet with people. We were never meant to socially isolate. Physically, get that right, folks. So we need to come together as people. Maintain your distance, maintain your safety, fine. But we need to come together as people. We need to help each other through this, because no one's going to be able to make it if we try to do this alone. The scars and the psychological scars and the issues that we're going to go through are so deep that there's no way to do this alone.
Well, thank you for that. And Dr. Sharma, always, and appreciate our friendship. And thanks for coming on the show and always being supportive and for your knowledge. So we'll see you here again. I know that. Everyone, this is John Malanca with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. And thank you again, Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, John.
See you all soon, and stay healthy, please.
Absolutely, my friend.
Hi, John Malanca here with United Patients Group. I hope you've enjoyed our videos. Please click like as well as subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. Also, follow us on Twitter at UPatients Group and on Facebook at United Patients Group, as well as for our podcast. Please click the link in the description below. We'll see you there. Bye-bye.